As Christians, we believe that God's timing is perfect, even when we don't quite understand it. Kevin, as a climatologist, you explained in a previous episode the role climate played in dictating the time frame for the emergence of large-scale agriculture. Are there other insights from climatology that help explain the timing for the earliest civilizations in the Middle East?
Yes, I believe so. Today when we think about, say, the Middle East, like Arabia or the Sahara, we think about vast desert, and that's basically true. But it hasn't always been like that. Let's say roughly 6,000 to 8,000 years ago, the climate of that area was much more humid. It's actually called the African humid period. And during that time, Arabia and the Sahara were basically a grassland. In fact, there were many lakes there, large animals there. You might find hippos, for example. The tilt of the earth, which is what's responsible for our seasons, it varies from about 21 or 22 degrees up to about 24 degrees. And that actually changes slightly over time on a cycle of about 40,000 years. And then there's precession. Precession is essentially the way that the pole is pointing. So right now it's pointing toward the North Star, but that actually moves around like a top. And that effect actually has its greatest impact in the tropics. So this would include the areas we're talking about. And as that began to change after about 6,000 to 8,000 years ago, the African Sahara and Arabia began to dry out. And because of this, humans found it less profitable to inhabit those areas. So they began to migrate to river valleys. And the reason that they ended up in these river valleys, like the Nile, the Euphrates, the Tigris in Mesopotamia, and the Nile in Egypt, is because those provided water sources, which were not affected by the drying of the Sahara and Arabia. Well, why was that? That was because, for instance, the source of the Euphrates and Tigris is up in the mountains of Turkey, and that's far enough away from these subtropical areas that winter storms and rains provide the source of water. And similarly, the Nile, its source is in Ethiopia, and that rain is provided by equatorial rains, which again were not as impacted. So these provided refuges, if you will, for people to move to, and once they got there, agriculture became a dominant form of living. And so even though there was agriculture in other areas before that, like we talked about in another video, in these areas it didn't really become the most profitable way, you could say, of sustaining a society until the Sahara and Arabia dried up.